Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Handmade Heroes, show where we code a complete game live on Twitch. No libraries, no engines, just us. And good old-fashioned C code, and a little bit of C++ code now and again as well, as the need arises. We are here on day 111. For those of you who are, adept at binary, you will note that is 7, right, or whatever it is. I hope you enjoy that little translation. But we are not in binary here. This is actually day 111. And so if you wanted to follow along at home and you pre-ordered the game on handmadehero.org, you should unpack day 110 because that is the source code that I am starting with. Now, before we actually do anything today, we had a thing in the pre-stream where Miblo was asking us to fix something in the code so he could use it in one of his ports. And so we will go ahead and do that right now. Essentially, what happened was when we introduced these here, I didn't give unique names to these values, like ignored 0 here. They're not used, but we need to give them unique names so that they don't conflict with the other ones up here. And if we do that, I think it'll allow it to go through his compiler properly. I'm not 100% certain why our compiler didn't complain about it, because technically, although these two would have shadowed each other, this one should have complained, because when you used ignored 0, I guess it wouldn't know which one it was. But I guess the Microsoft compiler maybe only complains if you actually use them, that it doesn't know which one you're referring to. And I guess that doesn't happen on like maybe LLVM or something goes, wait a minute. I don't know what's going on here. So again, that doesn't really affect anything for us, but it's just something to do to make it a little bit easier for anyone who's porting, who's running on Linux or something like that. Just trying to keep it easier for them to maintain the same code base. So there you go, Miblo. It should be all good now. Let's go ahead and see what we're doing. I believe what I said that we were going to do today was to take a look at our ground chunk stuff. I also wanted to, before we start, I wanted to go ahead and make this debug camera even be a little further out, because I'd like to be able to see the entirety of the pink region as well there. So let me go ahead and go into render group. If you remember yesterday, we introduced the concept that we could have one camera that's what the game thinks the camera is, and then another camera that's what we actually render from, so that if we want to, we can see sort of a bird's eye view of what the game is doing, with all of with everything that implies, right? And so if you take a look at this scene, right, the actual screen is the yellow area. That's what would actually have been rendered if we were using the regular camera. But then you can kind of see that there's, you can kind of see what else is going on. Like this stuff just got paged in because it came within the purple region and so on. So what I want to do here is I want to just kind of take a quick look, and I wanted to see about that whole paging situation, to see if things are actually paging in and out roughly where we think they should be. And to be honest, it looks okay. I guess we can, when we go in to do some finaling work on some of that stuff, we can double check to make sure that it is actually correct. But it actually looks pretty good. It looks like our sim region is actually paging things in where it needs to be and stuff like that. And so I'd say that's doesn't really warrant immediate attention. But I do want to kind of check some of that stuff out perhaps a little bit later. So anyway, yeah. It's kind of nice to be able to see all that stuff working properly. And you know what? We could also probably up our tree count. We reduced the number of trees in the world just to make it so that it was going to be less stress on the renderer. But since we're getting pretty close to where we're going to optimize that, we can probably reintroduce it to make it not that big of a problem. So let me go ahead and change that that tree part here, because we want to start making the game very slow so that we feel we kind of feel good about ourselves when we go to optimize it. We're like, look at what a good job we did. So that's that's always fun. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the place where we had dropped out some of the trees. You can see we kind of did a weird sort of thing here. So let's just get rid of that. Let's see, abs tile Z. Oops, that's the stairwell. My bad. It's this one. There we go. I don't know why. If it should be door, if should be door, why does it do if should be door and then do tile mod x mod 2? I don't. Shouldn't it be should be wall? That's confusing. I don't understand. I don't understand that. It's very odd. But anyway, I think this is just nonsense in our world creation code, which, you know, is just there to kind of be weird. All right. So anyway, there's all the trees in a ring like they should be again, and if we go up now, we can kind of see it. Now, what I'd like to do today, like I said, is kind of take a look at those ground chunks. Because, well, we got a couple things we might want to do. One is to look at the ground chunks. Another is to look at the collision stuff. But basically, we've got a Z situation that we still haven't resolved, which is that we both we said we wanted to move to Z layers, and we sort of did a little bit of work of moving to Z layers, like we do fading in and fading out based on the Z distance and other things like this. But at the moment, we don't really properly handle. I guess maybe I should zoom us back in here. Let's go ahead and use the regular size of things. So if I go ahead and actually walk up here, right? Oops, there we go. You can kind of see that we've got a bunch of things that we're not really handling yet. For starters, we've got a problem where we don't have any ground, right? We did that ground chunk work. So we actually have a system that can compose ground chunks for us, but we don't actually have any way of using them right now, because when we actually did the ground chunk, the system that actually calls the ground chunk composer, it only ever actually worked on one single plane. And so if we have multiple depth planes like this, we need to actually start thinking about that and introducing something that will actually work when used in that environment. Now, we set ourselves up to do that, basically. It's not like we didn't plan for it, but we never actually implemented it. And so what we want to do is we want to go do that. And I think that's probably the first thing that we'll tackle today. The other thing that we want to tackle today is we don't really process the ground properly. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say the other thing we want to tackle today. The other thing we want to tackle, if we have time, but you know, maybe we won't, so it'll actually go to next week. The other thing is we need to start actually thinking of these Z layers as actual layers. Because right now it's still very ad hoc. We sort of said we were going to have this concept of layers, and we now need the renderer to kind of understand those layers as well, because it's doing things like fading in them in and out and stuff like that. But we never actually, and we've got our light mapping system and so on, which also wants to think of things in terms of layers. But we really just don't have any conception of those layers in the actual code itself outside of the rendering system. And so what we need to do is start actually thinking about that more specifically, so that we can have data in the right place and understand it the correct way in the code, so that when we need to start talking about things like, you know, this is this layer, that's that layer, we actually have some idea of what entities that actually entails. This is kind of fun. I like walking around this world already and going up and down the stairwells. All right. Anyway, that's basically what we're doing. As soon as I can stop myself from walking around. Yeah, it's one of those things. What can you do when you're a programmer? If you like programming, you end up liking when things are sort of working, when things start working. All right, but I really want to see some ground in there, so that's my motivation to stop walking around here and actually go fix that. So let's talk about ground for a second. All right, so we already did a bunch of stuff with the ground. We've got a system here that does the ground compositing, right? We've got fill ground chunk that's here. But the problem with that is we have not actually done any thinking about how to like fill those and when to fill those and that sort of thing, right? We had a system that would work just for one plane, but we didn't go any further than that. So we've got our ground chunks here, ground buffers, right? Like so. And those ground buffers, they know where they are in the world, right? So you can see that it actually, each ground buffer knows where it is. The only thing that that's preventing us from being able to use ground buffers at multiple heights is our thing that actually goes and says when we need to fill these ground buffers needs to start thinking about the heights properly, right? It needs to think about what the height should actually be. And if I remember, well, I can tell you the truth, I don't actually remember. But I don't actually think we really did much with those Z chunks. I guess, well, you know what? No, I take it back. It looks like we actually did even do that part properly. Like, we are actually technically looping over the Z chunks and then doing some ground creation here. Looks like it. Well, I stand corrected. It looks like we are actually filling Z chunks there, or at least we are set up to do so. So the camera bounds in meters, it looks like really the only thing we would have to do there is when we actually render them. I suppose when we actually were rendering them, I don't know that we actually, yeah, so I don't know that we actually did anything when we actually rendered them. So let's take a look here. We're ground buffer, subtract camera P, bitmap width height. Gosh, I don't know. I'm going to go ahead and re-enable this. We've got some stuff that we're going to have to fix, but it's kind of weird. Like, it looks like we did a lot more work than I thought we did. Almost everything here looks like it's actually somewhat correct, actually. I mean, there's maybe some things to fix up, but that's very surprising. All right, well, what are you going to do? It's correct, it's correct. All right, so we had to do an alignment thing here where we were, we now use alignment percentage, not align, right, for the bitmaps. And that's actually nice because that means we can actually fix this stuff to just be, we know we always want it to be halfway in both directions, right? That's just what we want. We want it to be centered. So now we know that the align percentage is always the same thing. We don't really have to compute it based on the bitmap distance or anything like that, so that's pretty good. We no longer have the Z offset thing in here that we were testing with the camera, so that's all good. And so, yeah, I don't know if there's anything else we need to do there. We'll find out in a second. Push bitmap does not take 3 arguments. That's probably true. What we probably have to do here is now think about, we've got that whole meters to pixels situation that we wanted to fix with these ground chunks again. And so what we have to do is decide on a scale, right? I believe, if I'm not mistaken, decide on a scale, like, yeah. So we have to have an actual scale for our ground chunks, because right now we don't actually have one, right? What is that? What's happening there? Oh, wow. Okay. So one other thing that we did not think about here is that our basis for drawing the sim bounds here was never cleared. And this is something that we're going to have to start looking at in the renderer. So I want to show you what I saw that made me think of this. So you notice now that as I move around, I'm basically getting the screen rectangle, right? Which is the screen rectangle, which is that yellow thing, is switching where it is, right? And what I realized is that we have a system in here where we basically say what the basis is for all of our rendering. Once it gets set in here, it's sticky, right? So once we set the basis here, that means that when we do stuff later on, that basis is going to actually be kept, right? And so what we need to do is when we go to start doing our push rect outlines here, we need to change the basis back to be whatever the default actually is, right? Which I assume is just all zeros, right? Oops, that's not what I wanted. That's not what I wanted at all. So basis. I think we just got this here, if I want no offset. And that's something we want to clean up. That's not a good API at the moment, right? That's just, we're kind of, again, working through the render kind of slowly, but I just wanted something that would work. So there we go. Now we've got that back in there. But obviously my ground chunks are not showing up. And we have a bunch of things that we didn't do yet with ground chunks as well, which is, first of all, we have the fill ground chunk routine. We did not update this when we did a bunch of work on the rendering, right? We didn't really do anything in here. So I don't know what we need to fix. We may have to fix some stuff in here to see what has to get improved. to work with the new bitmap rendering stuff. And we're also going to have to make sure that the way we actually draw the ground buffers is still right. And like I said, the scale is wrong at the moment as well. So I'm going to start with something really simple. I'm basically going to get rid of everything that's in here because I just want to get this back to a reasonable working order. So all I'm going to do first is I'm just going to do that clear to purple, right? I want to do that clear to purple. And that way I can see, as soon as we actually have these guys rendering it all, we'll see some obvious purple, right? And then I want to go ahead and, what is this? Request background buffers. This is just some old vestigial code that we never used. So what I'd like to do here is just go ahead and figure out, you know what, I'm going to enable this temporarily as well, which is I want to be able to see where those ground buffers are. So what I want to do now is go ahead and try and get this stuff back into good working order, right? With the new rendering stuff. So here we go over our ground buffers, and for each ground buffer, assuming that it's valid, we will go ahead and try to render it, right? I don't actually know why we were pushing rect outlines in here. That's kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Yeah. I'm going to actually move this up here, I think. So what I'd like to do instead is when we do this push bitmap call, I'd like to push a rect outline optionally on top of that push bitmap call, right? And what I want to do is I want to make it basically outline whatever the bitmap outlined, right? And so I believe there's not much that I would have to do for that, right? I'm pretty sure I can just do a pretty straightforward rectangle outline here. And I don't actually know what the dimension is going to be of this thing yet. But I want to actually see, there we go. I want to actually see all of the places where we are currently rendering stuff. So there's all the places where we're currently supposedly rendering ground chunks. Now what's interesting is as I move away from here, you can see that it's never actually updating where those ground chunks are, which seems really bad. So that's obviously the first thing that we probably want to fix. So let's figure out why that's happening. So again, this is the rendering, this is the ground chunk rendering, right? This is ground chunk rendering. And this is ground chunk updating, right? So when we do the ground chunk updating, I'm not sure, it looks like we don't actually use the chunk stuff much. We're doing this here. We have our super inefficient thing that goes through for every chunk that we look at. We go through all of the ground buffers, right? We take a look to see if we have a furthest buffer. It looks like, what is this actually doing? If they're in the same chunk, so if it's already got one, I guess is what it's doing is saying it's already got a ground buffer for this place, then we do nothing. Otherwise, if it's valid, we see how far away it is and then possibly get the furthest buffer there. And then we'll do that fill ground chunk. So I probably accidentally nerfed the one thing that we actually needed. I put that if0 a little bit too far down. You can see that that ground buffer P, that's the update. So hopefully that will go ahead and fix that update, and it does. So you can actually see now those ground chunks getting kind of updated as we move around. And they look like they're actually working pretty well, right? You can kind of see it thinking about all those ground chunks as we move around. Now, again, a lot of this stuff is kind of janky at the moment because we haven't done much with it, but at least it looks like it's picking the locations that I would expect it to pick. And so that all seems pretty reasonable to me. Nothing particularly weird there, right? So what I want to do now is go ahead and see why we're not actually getting any, if we actually turn on the compositing, why we're not getting anything in the actual bitmap. So let's take a look at that code now, right, just to make sure. And some of this stuff, so I guess when we have these stamps and stuff, I don't know if they've got any kind of alignment stuff working with them. This stuff maybe, this looks also, I mean, just looking at this, I think I can see what the problem is. All of this stuff was still being done in pixel space, right? Which maybe, you know, I don't know, we might want to support that still. We might want to support having the renderer be in a mode that can support pixel space. But I suspect that we might as well do the same thing for the ground chunks as we're doing for everything else, which is to make it resolution independent, right? Because at the end of the day, we're just splatting a bunch of stuff in there anyway. So it seems to me like we would want to go ahead and make it work resolution independent. And so what that would mean is instead of looking at things like the width and the height now, we can just sort of consider these ground chunks to have some kind of a uniform size. However big we want that size to be, and then we just splat stuff into it, right? It's pretty straightforward. So what I'd like to do is just go ahead and say, all right, for ground buffers, we're just going to say that there's a particular size in meters of those ground buffers. We do here. And I guess, you know, what we could even do is let's make them line up with the chunks, since they're supposed to line up with the chunks. We know how big a chunk is, right? If we go ahead and look at Handmade World, we know in Handmade World we've got that chunk dim in meters. So what I'd like to do is say that whatever that world state is there, that's what we're going to use, right? So the size in meters of a ground chunk is just going to be whatever that chunk dim in meters is. So the first thing I'm going to do for that is I want to go ahead and get those outlines drawing in the right place. So when we go ahead and we do this work here for the ground chunks, I'm going to say that we want them to be based on that chunk size, right? And so, you know, we could also make the alignment of these bitmaps be based off of their corner. I guess, no, the center is correct because chunks are based around their center. So we want to keep the same thing, right? We want to base these to basically line up with our world rep for now. That's what I was thinking we should do, and that's what I'm going to stick with. So whatever we want that chunk dim to be, it would have to go in here, right? Whatever the scale is. And so that chunk dim in meters, right, is just going to be world chunk dim meters x. The x and y scale should be the same because this is square, so that should be fine. And I'm going to go ahead and maybe say that this is the ground side in meters or something like that, right? And we'll just grab that right out of there. Okay? So there's that ground side in meters. And here's that ground side in meters again. All right. And now I'm hoping anyway that everything, yeah, and it looks like it is, everything actually forms a coherent grid. So, you know, it's essentially covering a complete coverage of all of the area that might have some ground in it. Now, I would say really that looks about right to me. Nothing funny going on there as far as I can tell. So yeah, I would basically say that looks totally what I would that looks exactly like what I would want it to look like. So I don't think we've got any problems there. I think that's all good. Next step is just to fill those in with something. And again, like I said, I think the reason that we're having a problem here is because this is still all in pixels, which is not what we want. Now we've got a problem here, which is that in terms of when we allocate our render group, in terms of what we're actually sending down in for the sort of the width and the height of the thing that we're rendering to, the reason that that's a little bit wonky is because, you know, that's basically just something that's computing our perspective. That's all those are doing. And we don't really want to change what that is pretty much ever, right? We don't want our ground chunks to differ depending on a resolution or anything like that, right? So I'm not really sure what we want that to be, but I think what we'd probably want to do is I think we'd actually want to use whatever the actual buffer is there. We'll have to think this through. I want to get these working But then we may have to think about this a little harder because, again, we're still kind of working with that render group, and it may imply that we've got some other work that we are going to need to do there, right? Yeah. I mean, I guess the way to think about this is we really want to put this render group into an orthogonal projection mode, is what we want to do. Because we really don't want a perspective projection here at all. And so that might be the way to think of it. What we want to do is just pass standard normalized coordinates into the thing, and we want those to work. And so, yeah, I feel like we may have to expand our render group a little bit. We don't have to do it right away. We can kind of hack this into working, but I think that's actually what needs to happen. And so we'll do that, and we'll put that on the list. We'll put that on the list. So what we want to do here is something more like this. To do Casey, need to be able to set an orthographic display mode here, right? And that's what we'll do. So what we want to do for our ground chunks in terms of width and height now is we want to, again, use that game state. We want to use the world. We want to use whatever that chunk dim in meters is, right? So we've got our chunk dim in meters. We want to just use that for what the width and the height are of this thing, because they should be in essentially relative coordinates. And they're going to be relative to the center, so we really want to do something like half height and half width probably, because that's what we'd use for everything. And so then when we do this, let's see here. V2 center equals chunk offset at, well, okay, I take it back. We do actually want this. We don't want to pre-compute it that way. We'll do it like that. And that looks about right. So we're producing the center there. For the bitmap center, I feel like the bitmap center we shouldn't have to deal with anymore because our alignment code should take care of that. So what we want to do here is in our alignment code, when we actually go in here, what did we set it to by default, right? Top down align X and Y. So when we do debug load BMP, so when we do these debug load BMPs here, right? I think what I want to do is make it so that by default, when we load something, instead of the default being that it's, I want the default to actually produce even alignment, right? So I think what I want to do is suggest this, right? I want to make it so that if you call debug load with an align X and an align Y, then it will actually do that. But I also want to have some way for you to actually just say I want the default alignment, right? I want it to align to like the center or something like that. And I'm not sure what the best way to do that is. I guess one way I could do it, although we might want negative alignment, so I don't know. I'm trying to think. What I want to do here is something like, I don't know. I want really two functions. So what I want to do here is I want to break these out, right? I want to do something where I've got another one here, which when you just do this, it basically oh, well, I guess that's pretty easy. You know what? I'll just do that. Here we go. I don't know why I'm just dithering so long with that. It's been a long day. All right. So if we do this here where we actually load, we just have like a thunk call basically, which does the load by calling the existing function, right? Like so, and then just takes the result and sets that result align percentage to be equal to that, 0.5, 0.5. Then it looks like that's just, that's just all we would really need, right? So we now have another way to debug load bitmap, oops. And we just pass zeros for that because we don't care what it is, right? So I believe that would actually give us what we wanted, which is, of course, I do not know what's going on right now. There we go. Okay. I believe that's what we wanted, so everything will load properly. And yeah, I think everything looks, I don't see any bugs from switching to that load bitmap. All right. And so now let's go ahead and finish what I was saying. So that gets us out of the business of having to deal with these bitmap centers, right? The bitmap centers go away, and so that's good. No more bitmap centers, which is another good thing. So we don't have to think about it anymore. So when we do these random choices, really all we need now is a random bilateral that we can use to basically position this thing inside the chunk. And so I think what I'm going to do is say that we've got like this will be the half dim, and I'll just do it like this. Right, I'll produce that half dim here. And so really all we have to do is say, okay, we've got a random bilateral in this case now, random bilateral, random bilateral, and I'm just going to do, that's just going to be always made with the Handmade product of the half dim and a random vector, right? And so what that's going to do is give us some random thing from the center out to the edge, right? And then we just go ahead and use that center plus offset. In fact, we don't really need to, we could make this a lot simpler, in fact, and just do this, like so. And that would be that, right? So I think that's really all we need there. Same thing would be true over here, right? In fact, I think it's exactly the same thing. There's really nothing else that was all exactly the same. Yeah, so let's go ahead and try that out now. And let's see if that produces anything more usable for us in terms of ground chunks. Still nothing. That's disappointing. I was thinking we would see something there, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and we'll take a look at what we're actually seeing. Now, the fact that the frame rate's going so slowly implies to me that we are properly drawing those ground chunks now. It's just they're not filled with anything, right? So what is going on? What did I mess up? And you know, now that I think about it, we did a clear. So even if we weren't blitting anything, we should have seen it. So I'm making some fundamental error here when we're actually drawing these things. And so I'll have to go see why that is, because technically, I forgot my thing that I wanted to do. Technically, once we do this, right, if we just do that clear, we should, at that point, we should see the pink. We should see that debug, that hideous pink, right? So I'm wondering why we're not seeing that. And let's take a look. So we're not seeing it. We do a push bitmap here, right? We're doing it with ground side in meters, 0, 0. The bitmap itself, we are getting from ground buffer bitmap. See what's happening there. Yeah, I mean, right, it seems like we should be seeing something there, and I'm not sure why we aren't. And that is kind of troubling. So something is weird there, because the same exact drawing command that follows right after it does show up. And so the bitmap, I'm going to go ahead and just verify something, just to make sure that we know that the bitmap is what's wrong, right? I'm going to go ahead and say that the game state, there's a tree, right? Let's push that instead of the bitmap. And so now we should see like trees everywhere, right? And as you can see, we do see trees everywhere, and they are scaled what looks like appropriately even. So we're drawing in the correct place. But for some reason, our bitmap is not even filled with the debug purple. And I have no idea why that would be, right? So fill ground chunk. I'm going to go ahead and step into that and see what's happening in there. Let's go ahead and say fill ground chunk. When I walk around here, oh my. What just happened? Why did it never call fill ground chunk? Okay, are we never calling fill ground chunk? I mean, I did set a breakpoint, did I not? Fill ground chunk. I don't know what these guys are doing here. So we never call fill ground chunk. All right, well, that would explain why there's nothing in the bitmap. At the risk of stating the overwhelmingly obvious, right? So, all right, I guess let's take a look at why we're not ever filling any ground chunks ever. Which doesn't even make any sense to me, because if we're not filling them, how is it drawing them up here? It's just, that's nonsensical. I don't understand. All right. Oh, I know what's wrong. We're still building in the O2 build. Ladies and gentlemen, the Visual Studio Debugger apparently is too dumb to set a breakpoint at the inlined point of a function. Oh well. All right, let's try that again. Here we go. So we come in here, and what buffer are we filling here? Let's take a quick look. Buffer. So all looks pretty reasonable. That looks like a buffer. 256 by 256 buffer, and there's some memory. We've got align percentage is not set to anything at the moment. So here we go. We're going to clear that, right? Which pushes one of these guys on there, puts the entry color on there. And now we're going to go render to group output. We're going to loop through here. We're going to encounter that clear. And then we're going to do a rectangle draw call into the buffer, in theory. So let's take a look at the output target. Output target. The output target is the buffer that we thought it should be. Width over height. That is our problem. We did not initialize our bitmap width over height to anything. Did you see that? That is our problem. So when we do fill ground chunk, we should probably, I don't know who wants to be responsible for this stuff. I'm not sure. Let's take a look here. But that, so that align percentage, when we do that, we probably want to, in here, basically say, all right, the buffer's align percentage set that, and the width over height, make sure that they're even. So that way it's set properly. So I suspect that was the problem. So it was just always thinking that the bitmap had no dimension at all, right? At least I'm assuming that's what was happening. Not actually sure though. All right, that's a little bit better. So hold on a second. And now we have to actually do some work in here, right? And I guess, sorry, pink. I don't know why I was thinking pink. This is actually yellow, right, that we're clearing it to. But yeah, that's beside the point. So off we go. And let me go ahead and set our minus O2 back here. So we run a little faster. All right, so now we're going to be incredibly slow because at the moment our ground chunk actual building is super, super slow. But all right, so now we're at least back into some semblance of reasonableness here. And of course, all of that blitting is just super expensive for our, for our renderer. So we're probably not going to be able to use this hardly at all, right? I mean, you can see, look at that frame rate, because it's overdrawing all of that stuff. Look at how painful that is. It can't hardly do it. Now remember, we're not sorting anything here, so we've kind of got this situation where different ground chunks at different heights are just doing arbitrary stuff. But at least now we can see, okay, we are filling them in properly. Everything seems to be kosher. Now, we need to adjust that scale because at the moment we're still using that perspective transform in there, which means that when we actually go to fill the ground chunk, everything's kind of tiny and far away that we splat in there. So if we wanted to, we could fix that by just making the stamps much bigger, right? But that's not probably how we want to handle that eventually. I'm just going to go ahead and do that so you can kind of see what I mean. Like so. That's all, that's all I'm talking about with that. So let's let that go ahead and do its little splatting. Again, it's going to be excruciatingly slow. Excuse me. All right. And again, what we're waiting for here is the excruciatingly slow process of doing like tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of splats into those bitmaps, right? And it's producing 64 ground chunks. Each of them has 1,024. Well, actually, I don't even know how many splats that has in it. Fill ground chunk. Let's see. Fill ground chunk. chunk P, where is it? 100 and 50. So it's doing 150 times a 64, and it just takes forever to fill all those guys in. Or wait, it's not even, I don't even remember how many actually were there for those ground buffers. Ground buffer count. Oops. Ground buffer count. 64. Yeah. All right. Excuse me. Now, if we can ever get back there. So there. Now, what's kind of interesting, that looks like I made it much too large. All right, let's try that one more time. I guess 5.0 was much too large. Let's see here. Fill ground chunk. And let's take that down to 2 or something like this. And then, of course, I guess the other thing we need to do is this thing right here is not actually, this is, I'm going to put the to-do in here, basically. To-do, once we switch to orthographic, stop multiplying this. Basically, we're not covering a wide enough region, right? So we need to do something like this to make sure that we actually do cover it. Because again, we're actually doing perspective transform into our actual ground buffers, which again makes no sense whatsoever. But that's just the way the render is set up at the moment. And so what we have to do is make sure that we're actually covering the whole thing in order to get them big enough. So we'll see if that's actually, it's not quite there yet. It needs to be a little further out. And also this, you know what? I think I did it backwards. I think they actually were too big originally. These guys are like way too big, I guess, because they should be like a half a meter. And then these things should be like 2 meters that you splat on the backing plates, I guess. Something like that. I don't know. It's kind of confusing. But yeah. All right. So we're getting there slowly but surely. And I guess there really isn't that much to do here. Excuse me. Yeah. So I think what would help, I'm loath to say it because I don't actually want to have to do this. But I think what would help here is if they were actually layered properly, right? Because I can't tell which layer I'm looking at, and it makes it hard for me to tell what the right sizes are for things, right? I also don't understand why we're getting so much yellow showing through. I guess it's because the backing parts are still not quite big enough. They should be more like 3 meters wide, I guess, or something like this. But yeah, and so let's go ahead and see here. So I think we may actually have to do one level of sorting. Like I said, didn't really want to have to deal with that at this point, but whatever's the next logical thing to do is the next logical thing to do. So let's make those a little bigger here. And these were a little too tiny as well, I feel like. All right. So that's good, I think. Producing those ground chunks seems okay. And if I'm going to sort these, so here's one thing I could do at the moment when I render them, right? I could just only render ones, and ground buffer p.z, is within some region of 0, right? It's like greater than or equal to 1.0f, right? And oops, negative 1.0f. And ground buffer p is less than 1.0f. There we go. Let's see here. Oops. I wanted that in world space. So I actually want the delta. If delta z and delta z. So if it's far from the camera, I'm not going to draw it, right? And so I just wanted to see if I could make that do something reasonable, right? Let's take a look. Oh, how long it takes. We really need to optimize the render. I'm not one for slow turnaround times. They always drive me batty. All right, so there's one layer of them. I'm not sure why we're not filling in over here. I wonder if that's because we've overflowed the number that we have to use. That could entirely be because now we're doing so many depth layers there. But yeah. So let's see. If I come into the game eventually. Hello. Which it doesn't seem to want me to do. Yeah. It's crazy how slow that is now. It's going to feel really good to optimize this. So I guess, I mean, here's what I would say about this. So I feel like it really wouldn't be that onerous for us to optimize some of this stuff. It wouldn't be inappropriate for us to optimize some of this stuff right now, because although we haven't had a chance to finish what we want to do for lighting, so stuff like the ground buffer compositing we could easily go ahead and do the optimization for, right? Because that's going to use a bitmap blit that doesn't actually have any lighting on it to produce those tiles. So I feel like because that's causing such a problem, we could optimize the ground buffer build, and then we could call that version the blit that doesn't actually do any lighting. We could call the blit that doesn't do any lighting for drawing the ground buffers as well until we get the lighting finalized, and then we write the optimized version of that, right? Because there's nothing we're really going to be able to do when it's going this slowly, and we know we can speed this up dramatically, right, from where it is. So I think that might just be the thing we do next. I don't know. Because, hey, we've got a thing that's totally not usable right now at speed, so it would feel really good to optimize it, and usually that seems to me to be the best time to do it, right? Because we're going to be excited about it, and it's going to be cool. So I would say maybe that's where we'll leave it. I would say maybe that's what we do next week. Next week will be like our optimize the renderer pass. And we'll go ahead and do one optimized pixel fill routine. It'll be the unlit pixel fill blit routine. And we'll just do one there. Because we can even do one to throw away, right? We can do one that just, that we use temporarily, because we'll learn some stuff from optimizing that that will guide us in our optimizations for other stuff. So that seems to be a good idea to me. That's what I think we'll probably want to do. That seems good. All right, so I'll leave it there for now. I think that's really all I want to do. It looks like those actually layer in properly as well, so yeah, we're pretty good. We're in pretty good shape. Really what we're going to have to do is just go ahead and do one optimization pass just so we can have a good rendering feel so that things run fast enough, right? But yeah, I think that's about it. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. And I've been wanting to do the optimization stuff in the renderer for a while, so it gives me a good excuse. It's like, well, we can't really do anything if it's going to run that slowly, other than just turning stuff off. And so I feel like maybe now is a good time to just go ahead and do that. And so what we could do, in there is essentially we've got our draw rectangle slowly. We can basically make a draw rectangle slowly version that doesn't do lighting, right? Because since we don't really know how we want to do the lighting yet. We could do a draw rectangle slowly that doesn't do the lighting and that's optimized. So it'll just do this exact same thing here, but it'll be optimized, it'll be SIMD optimized, so we can go through and have all that work, right? That seems reasonable to me. All right, so that's what we'll do. We'll go to the Q&A. Let's see here. So if you have a question, go put Q: in front of it. Star7, there are 15 minutes left of the stream since you went over in the pre-stream. There are, but do we really want to start optimization right now? don't know. That's a good question, right? I'm not sure if that's a good idea or not. I don't think I want to. I think I want to stop it, and then on Monday we'll do the beginning of the optimization stuff. And what we could do is maybe take an extra 15 minutes that day or something like that, right? No stream tomorrow, right? That is correct. No stream tomorrow. Grumpy Giant 56. How are you going to handle the ground chunks on the further layers which disappear while still on screen? Will you need to expand the visibility range based on layer distance? So I'm not sure what we want to do about that, but I think my gut says that what we'll want to do is essentially have what amounts to like a fog concept, like a fog of war basically, because that would apply not just to ground chunks, but to everything. So if we do the perspective foreshortening, which looks kind of cool, so I feel like we want to keep it. If we do the perspective foreshortening, I feel like we just want to introduce an artistic conceit to the style of the game, basically, which is that, only a certain range is visible and it fogs out to black or something there. Because otherwise you could see just really far. And I mean, maybe that's fine. I mean, performance-wise, we may be fine. We may be able to handle it just fine, especially on the GPU path, right? But I don't know if it has negative implications for gameplay. Where like you shouldn't be able to see all this stuff that's around there, right? So I don't know. I think that's going to have to be a gameplay call at the end of the day. And for now, what we'll do is we'll just let it be. But if it turns out that gameplay it's fine, well then we will just expand. We will just expand the query region to be basically like a pyramid or a frustum, as they might call it. But if not, then we'll leave it as a rectangle. Some elements in the ground are being repeated now for some reason. What does repeated now mean in this case? Some elements in the ground are being repeated now. Yeah, sorry. Can you be more specific about what that means? I'm not sure what that means, so I can't really... Corpse Lulu, I'm afraid of using sorting and stuff when making games because I'm afraid that if I get too many items, it will slow down. Or shall I not worry about that? Well, you should worry about it, obviously, but you should worry about it to the extent where you figure out how many items you're likely to have, and then you figure out whether or not you can sort that many, right? If you're talking about having 1,000 items, then you can definitely sort that many. If you're talking about having 100 million items, then no, you probably can't, right? And so the question is not whether you can sort stuff in a game. The question is how much stuff you can sort in a game. And you need to have some idea of what the maximum bound is of the number of items that you might be working with, right? And so that's really... But that's true of everything, right? That's true of any algorithm that isn't ON. You need to have some conception of how it's going to scale up. I mean, even ON, you have to have some idea of how it's going to scale, right? You could always pick a number of items that will break whatever the algorithm is that you're using if it has to iterate over things. I think it'd be really cool to see far down, for example, floors made of ice or glass. Yeah, I agree with that. That would be kind of cool if you were in an ice area. In fact, I'm going to add that to the thing since we've got it. That does sound like it would be pretty cool. So let me open up the reminders file. Okay. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Will the memory footprint keep getting bigger? There's so much raw pixel data being stored right now. Is this a concern at all? Will we be compressing data to save RAM? I imagine not, but it still feels like we're using too much memory for just a 2D game. Correct me if and because I'm wrong. So here's the thing. In terms of memory footprint, this is the way I look at it, right? The thing you don't want to do is use memory for no benefit. Right? So like, let's say you're, the Facebook front end for iPhone, right? And you just eat all of the memory, but you're not actually doing anything. Like, it's just a stupid picture, you scroll or whatever. That makes me super grumpy because I'm like, okay, you're making the performance of this thing chuggy and it's weird and the paging is slow and it's crashing because it's using too much memory and all this other stuff. And you didn't actually do anything, right? You displayed something really trivial. And that makes me very angry, right? But I am not angry at all, and in fact I am glad, if a program uses all of the memory in the machine to do something cool, right? And so what I would say is, when we're done with this game, what we would like to have happen is we would like to take however much memory is in the machine and use all of it for something cool, right? We would like to have a plausible argument why every single thing is being used for a cool reason, right? And so if a gamer bought a 16 gigabyte of RAM machine, right? What we want to do is use that 16 gigabytes of RAM to give them game, right? And so it doesn't matter that the game's 2D. I still want to find as many things as I can use the end user's computer to give them something cool. If we're just wasting the memory, that's not so good. But if we're actually doing something interesting, then that's good. And so to me, stuff like generating the ground chunks is a great use of memory because it means that now the user has unique textures everywhere for their whole world. And that was a good use of their system resources. And so if a 2D game normally can't use, say, a 4 gigabyte graphics card or something, well, here's a way we can start to try and use some of that. And it produces a good effect, right? So the goal is never to use the least amount of memory. There's really no benefit to that because the memory in the machine is the memory in the machine. What you want to do is use all of the memory, but you want to use it for something good. You just don't want to waste it. You want to have a reason why each part of it's being used and an argument of why using that extra 256 megs or whatever in here or in another 50 megs there or whatever is actually giving the user something good. Are the ground chunks stored in some data structure, or are they recalculated each frame? At the moment, they are not really stored in a data structure, but they're not recalculated every frame. They're just in an array. And so what I wanted to do, and we talked about this briefly, but we haven't gotten there yet, is they'll probably end up being stored in the world structure. That's what I suspect. We're kind of going that direction. You can see that we almost already did that. It's right here, right? So eventually, I think that's what we'll probably do. We haven't quite gotten there yet. There was a horizontal repetition of some splats, but not all of them. A horizontal repetition of some splats, but not all of them. I'm sorry, I still don't really know what that means. Do you think you are roughly 1/5 of the way through completing the game at this point? Yes, I do. Well, we're not quite 1/5. We still have a little bit more to go time-wise to 1/5. But yeah, I think we're about 1/5. We'll see. When we get to day 200, that's where I was expecting to kind of stop working on engine stuff. So are we halfway through the engine right now? Yeah, probably. That sounds about right. So seems correct to me. All right, so repetition of horizontal splats. Let's see if we can zoom this in a little. Repetition of horizontal splats. So I mean, what you might be seeing is just the fact that we don't have very many splats in there and we're not doing anything intelligent with them. So they tend to form similar shapes sometimes because of the low number, like that and that. But they're actually different, right? Like you can see that these things are actually not the same. But I don't know if that's what you're thinking. But yeah, they're not exactly, they're actually different, right? When all RAM, even on the GPU, is used, when the game is put into the background, switching a short time to their application, all the memory has to be swapped in and out, right? Even to the GPU, or what strategy is used to prevent swapping in and out of big memory chunks? So not all of it gets swapped, just however much the application needs. But yeah, it gets swapped in and out. And the answer is you don't do anything to prevent that, right? That's if the user wants to switch to an application in the middle of playing a game, then they get whatever they get, right? As far as I'm concerned, that means they didn't care about how the game experience was. If you're in the middle of switching to, Microsoft Excel or something, then I don't care about your performance, right? Like, performance is only for someone who's willing to run the game dedicated and give it all the resources in their machine. And if they choose to give it less resources than that, then they're going to have a worse experience, right? And that's fine. And that's their decision. And that's also, why I tend to think like I like the sort of... I would prefer it if there was a more rigid boundary there. Like, I don't really like the fact that Windows does multitasking on games and stuff. I would prefer that you basically said, okay, we're going to run this game now, and it gets all the resources, and if you want to switch out to something else, then it will essentially pause the game and do sort of a very significant swap out event where you don't expect it to sort of half keep running in the background and stuff like that. I would rather it be a little more console-like in that way. But yeah. Are we rotating and scaling the slats on the ground chunks to get the maximum variability? Not yet. We will do scaling. Rotation, on the other hand, we can't quite do, I don't think, because the things kind of have a perspective baked into them, so I don't know how much rotation we can do, but we can scale them in the future when we do the thing. I noticed the hero's head would clip through the trees on occasion and then it would fix itself. What's causing that? That is actually the same things I was talking about with the sorting, with the ground layers. We don't sort anything right now. We're just drawing everything to the screen in the order in which we process it. And so what you were seeing there is just whatever happened to be drawn first. It's actually the same reason why, like, say, this tree appears behind this one, even though logically it should be in front. So what we need to do to change that is we will actually end up sorting stuff as it comes out, and we'll render it in the correct order, and that will fix both of those problems. All right, looks like that's about it. I'm gonna go ahead and close this down here. There we go. Okay, thanks everyone for joining me for another episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you as always. I think we have gotten to the point where it's time for us to do some render optimization, so I think that's what we're going to do next week. We are off tomorrow. There's no stream tomorrow on Friday, so it's been a bit of a short week. But we should be back for a full week next week, Monday through Friday. So I hope you will join us for that. It should be fun when we start talking about optimization topics. So I'll try to do a little bit of an introduction to how to time code, and then we'll talk a little bit about how to do SIMD optimizations and that sort of stuff. So we'll start covering that stuff next week, and we'll get into some of the how to, basically figure out what's actually taking the time and make a plan about how we're going to solve it. So I think that should be a lot of fun. I hope you'll join me for that. In the meantime, if you would like to play around with the source code, You can always get a copy of it by going to handmadehero.org and pre-ordering the game. It comes with the source code, and you can play around with that and have fun learning from it and all that sort of stuff. If you want to support the video series, we do have a Patreon page you can pledge to. We very much appreciate that. We also have a forum site where you can go to check out the annotated episode guide. You can post questions on the forums there, and you can also get ports to Mac and Linux, stuff like that. And then there's also a Twitter feed which tweets the schedule at you, so if you want to catch the stream live, that's the easiest way to stay up to date on that. So definitely check that out if you've got to get a chance. So again, there's no stream tomorrow, so I will see you guys on Monday, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, back here on Twitch. Until then, I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend, and I will see you later.